Hello all, and welcome to Mishnah Zevachim with Rabbi Walfish. We have been learning with him for the past 3 weeks, and we are happy to have him back for the fourth session. Mishnah in Depth is part of the Rifka Rosenwein Mishnah Division at Drisha and is sponsored by her family in her memory. As a reminder, this class is following the Mishnah Yomit schedule, so we are assuming that you have been learning Zevachim 1 or 2 mishnayot a day on your own, and we're coming together to review a couple weeks worth of material. And I just want to remind people that this is the last session of Mishnah Zevachim that will be live due to some prior obligations. Rabbi Walfish will not be able to teach in person the next 2 weeks, but nevertheless, there will be class, there will be recordings, and no one will miss out on shiur. And with that, I am going to hand things over to Rabbi Walfish.
Okay, this is from last week's source sheet. Erev Tov to everyone. Okay, what we did at the end of last class was a kind of introduction to a very central Mishnah in chapter 7 that we didn't get a chance to look at, and I want to take a few minutes to look at it because it touches on some very important themes. We gave a kind of general overview of the laws of mi'ilah. Mi'ilah meaning misappropriation of things belonging to hekdesh. Mi'ilah is applicable to two different kinds of hekdesh. One of them, which we will not be discussing, is called bedek habayit. Roughly parallel to something called kedushat damim, which means that these are items that belong to hekdesh, but that will not actually be used in the temple service. They're things that will be sold, and the proceeds will be used for various purposes. That's not under discussion right now. Now we're talking about kedushat haguf, things that have sanctity, which prepares the item for actual use in the temple service. So these items also are subject to the laws of mi'ilah, misappropriation, which carries with it, particularly when it's committed inadvertently, b'shogeg, carries with it ramifications. The item, in many cases, not all, the item ceases to be sanctified, and there's a sacrifice to be brought to atone for the misappropriation. There's compensation. Okay, these are all things that will be studied more in depth in other tractates in Seder Kodshim. Okay, but what's important for this Mishnah is this overview that sacrifices, as we saw in chapter 5, was already announced in chapter 1. We saw this in greater detail in chapter 5. Sacrifices divide into two major groups, Kodshei Kodashim and Kodashim Kalim. Kodshei Kodashim mean that the whole purpose of the sacrifice is service of God, service in the temple, and even when parts of the sacrifice are for consumption, the consumption is itself part of the temple service. Okay, so roughly, okay, this is a schematic overview. The three types of sacrifices that come under Kodshei Kodashim are Olah, Chatat, and Asham. And for all of those sacrifices, the minute the animal is designated as one of those sacrifices, it is immediately subject to mi'ilah because the animal is designated for temple service. But that applies until the point of Zrikat Adam, as we've seen in our Tractates Zevachim. Zrikat Adam is called in the Mishnah a matir, okay, something that permits something else. Okay, now what happens to most of the body of the animal is something that can happen only after the blood part of the offering. As we've seen throughout Tractates Zevachim, the blood work of the offering, the blood service, is very, very central in the view of the Mishnah. Okay, and at that point, the rest of the sacrifice undergoes a certain kind of transformation. Okay, namely that the body of the animal is now mutar, okay, has now become permitted for the service you're supposed to perform with it. So when it comes to the sake of Kodshei Kodashim, it all depends what kind of service. So prior to Zrikat Hadam, the whole animal is considered to be completely devoted to temple service, is subject to Me'ilah. However, any time there's a sacrifice where human beings have a part of the sacrifice, that is not subject to Milah, because then the animal is not completely designated for God. Part of it is for man, and then it's not subject to Milah. So Kodashim Kalim, for example, when they're sanctified, when they're designated, they are not subject to Milah, because Kodashim Kalim are viewed as sacrifices, which are a kind of partnership. God gets part of the animal, and the person who brought the sacrifice gets part of the animal that he and his invited guests will then consume. So, as of now, there is no Mi'ilah. Once Zrikat Hadam has occurred, and now you're supposed to do with the body of the animal what this korban demands. So if it's an olah offering, then yes, it is still subject to milah. It was before Zrikat Hadam. It continues to be after Zrikat Hadam. The chatat and the asham, on the other hand, the animal divides into two parts. Okay, the fats, what's called in halakha the imurim, fats in certain internal organs that are offered on the mizbeach, so those have milah because they're designated for the mizbeach. But the meat of the sacrifice, okay, which is designated to be eaten by priests, even though that is part of the temple service, nevertheless, it means there is a human element here. It is not subject to mi'ilah. That's true of the chatat and the asham. The got to kodashim kalim, zrika, Zrikat Hadam has the opposite effect. Since prior to Zrikat Hadam, we consider the whole sacrifice to be kind of partnership between God and man, no mi'ilah at that juncture. But then, after Zrikat Hadam, once again, this will be similar to the chatat and the asham. The meat will not be subject to mi'ilah. The fats, which are offered on the altar, will be subject to mi'ilah. Okay, that's our basic introduction to the laws of mi'ilah, and now let's turn to the Mishnah where this becomes significant. Okay, so I'm reading from Perek Zayin Mishnah Daled. Okay, Perek Zayin Mishnah Daled. Let's just look at it in the English. The exact language of the Hebrew isn't so crucial for what we'll be discussing. A bird burned to offering that one improperly sacrificed, namely below the red line, what the Mishnah calls lemata. Okay, at the halfway point on the altar. The altar was 10 cubits high, and at the halfway point, okay, there is a red line that marks off the division between the lower and the upper, and that's important particularly for the Zrikat Hadam. Okay, the blood offering, we're talking about animals now, so the blood offering of most sacrifices is below the red line, lamata. That includes the olah and the asham and the shlamim, are all offered lemata. okay, and all of them also are offered at the two corners of the altar. Okay, okay, so it's like it's called Shtayim Shehein Arba, which means there are two throwings of the blood. Since there are two corners, that includes all four sides of the altar. Okay, that's the lower, and the chatat is the upper. When it comes to bird offerings, it's the opposite. And this Mishnah is talking about bird offering. So the olah is on the upper part, okay, and the olah and the chatat rather is on the lower part. So you took a burnt offering, a bird olah, and the blood is supposed to be squeezed out onto the wall of the altar above the red line, and instead he did it below, and did it for the sake of a sin offering. In other words, he made a complete mistake. He took this bird that was designated as an olah and offered it. The blood was offered as though it were a chatat, with the intention of, yes, I am offering a chatat. Now, this is our classic shelo lishma case, which we remember from the first four chapters, especially chapter 1 and the end of chapter 4. We talked a lot about this notion of when you offer the sacrifice, you have to have in mind which sacrifice it is that you're offering. And if you had the wrong intention, so then at the very least, what that does is it could be that the sacrifice is valid, which is true for most sacrifices. Sacrifice will be valid, but it will not count for the person who brought it. He will have to replace it with another sacrifice of the same kind. Okay, for the chatat and the Pesach is obviously not relevant here, but the chatat is. For the chatat, it completely disqualifies the sacrifice. Okay, so this bird burnt offering that was offered shelo lishman, okay, and offered also in, the blood work was done under that mistake, so it was done as though it were a chatat. Okay, so that is a valid offering, even though the person who brought the korban will have to replace it. And now the question is, what about the laws of me'ilah? Rabbi Eliezer says he is liable for me'ilah, and Rabbi Yoshua says he is not liable. And then Rabbi Eliezer offers an argument. Okay, it's a kal v'chomer argument. Okay, in the case of a sin offering that was sacrificed for its sake, if you offered a sin offering, a chatat, with the right intention, okay, then there is no me'ilah. The bird offering there are no fats offered on the altar, and so there is no me'ilah for a bird chatat offering. Okay, nevertheless, okay, if you did it shelo lishma, you changed this designation, then there is me'ilah. So in the case of a burnt offering, which is more stringent in the case of me'ilah, because when you sacrifice it for properly for its own sake, it is subject to me'ilah. Like these are the laws we learned earlier. The chatat after zrikat adam does not have me'ilah. The olah after zrikat adam does have me'ilah. Okay, so when we're talking about the sacrifice offered properly for its own sake, chatat no, olah yes. So now the a fortiori argument, the kal v'chomer argument, is that with regard to the chatat, if you change its designation, okay, then it should certainly have me'ilah. Okay, now I know that is hard to follow, and that's why I made, no, wrong thing, wrong page. Let's get the right page. That's why I designed this chart. Okay, so here we have the text of the Mishnah, and here we have the chart explaining how the Kal Vachomer argument works. Rabbi Eliezer says the chatat lishma, when offered properly, has no mi'ilah, and I put in parentheses the explanation: the meat is permitted for the kohanim. The olah, when it's done lishma, is more stringent, right? That's the bottom line here. B is greater than A. The olah lishma is more stringent because it has mi'ilah when the olah is brought properly. So now let's look at the next side, the right side. So the chatat, when it's lo lishma, has mi'ilah. Why? Because when the chatat is offered lo lishma, the sacrifice is disqualified and the meat is prohibited, so it has mi'ilah. Okay, so now if B is always greater than A, which we see on the left side, olah has more mi'ilah stringency than chatat. So here too, on the right side, when it's done, that's when it's done properly. So here on the left side, when it's done lo lishma, the olah should also be more stringent than the chatat in terms of mi'ilah. The chatat has mi'ilah, so the olah should also have mi'ilah. That's Rabbi Eliezer's argument. Okay? And Rabbi Yoshua says you're ignoring a crucial factor. The crucial factor you're ignoring, says Rabbi Yoshua, we'll see it in his language, and then we'll look at the chart. Lo, you're wrong. Im amarta bechatat sheshina et shma l'shem olah. Sheken et shina et shma b'davar sheyesh bo milah. Tomar bo'olah sheshina et shma l'shem chatat. Sheken shina et shma b'davar she'ein bo milah. Rabbi Yoshua says, here's the factor you're ignoring, my good friend Rabbi Eliezer. What you're ignoring is that, we'll look at the right side here, the chatat lo lishma, you just looked at, chatat lo lishma has mi'ilah. But I'm adding in a factor you ignored. Chatat lo lishma, when you offered the chatat for the wrong intention, thinking mistakenly it was an olah, you changed it to a korban that is subject to mi'ilah. Whereas when you offered your olah lo lishma, your mistake was you thought it was a chatat, and chatat lo lishma doesn't have mi'ilah. Okay, they're saying since you're changing it to a chatat, which is generally not subject to mi'ilah, so that's why here too it will not be subject to mi'ilah. Okay, now a little complicated. I hope you were able to follow it, but even if not, okay, here's the takeaway from this conversation. Okay, and the takeaway is, for the sake of our somewhat cursory study, more important than following all the ins and outs of the Kal Vachomer, yes or no. Rabbi Eliezer looks at what the bird was designated for. And when you offered it with the wrong intention, Rabbi Eliezer still says the chatat remains a chatat and the olah remains an olah. And if the chatat, when it's offered lo lishma, is subject to mi'ilah, so the olah, which has a general rule, that's our left side of the chart, olah as a general rule, when it's offered lishma, is more stringent in terms of mi'ilah than the chatat. So on the right side of the chart, the olah should be more stringent than the chatat, which means Rabbi Eliezer says, despite the fact that the person had the wrong korban in mind when he offered it, the korban remains what it is. The chatat remains a chatat. the olah remains an olah. And if olah is more stringent than chatat in the laws of mi'ilah, it will, the same way it's more stringent on the left side, when it's lishma, when it's offered properly, so too it should be more stringent on the right side when it's offered improperly. And Rabbi Yoshua says I have to look at what the intention tried to change it to. When your intention tried to change it to an olah, then you're changing it to something subject to milah. So yes, it has milah. The chatat, when it's lishma, doesn't, because then it was offered as a chatat, which is not subject to milah. When the chatat is offered as an olah, you treat it like an olah, and it has mi'ilah. But when the olah is offered as though it were a chatat, I look at it as though it were a chatat. It is not subject to mi'ilah. Okay, and the Bavli in Masechet Zevachim 67a explains Rabbi Yoshua's rationale. Okay, just look at the last line. Kevan shemalach basiman echad. Remember, the slaughtering of a bird offering is with the thumbnail, okay, called malak. Once you have done malika on one of the two vital pipes, either the windpipe or the food pipe of the bird, nimshechet v'naseitz chatat ha'of. You don't look at it any longer as an olah. You now look at it as a chatat. Okay? So now, what's crucial here is that we're really given a much clearer picture of how the rabbis viewed lo lishma. When I had the wrong intention, does that change the character of the korban? Up till now, we've just talked about does it disqualify the korban? But now we're having a dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. How does it impact on the designation of the korban? Does it completely change the designation of the korban or not? Rabbi Eliezer thinks no, it doesn't. It's just a factor in whether the korban can be accepted or not. And Rabbi Yoshua says it's more than a factor in whether it's acceptable. It's a factor in what is the identity of this korban. The wrong intention really changes the whole identity. I originally designated the korban for one thing, but the minute I offered it with the wrong intention, then I changed its whole identity. Okay, so that's a very important discussion between these two sages that now will free us to more things to discuss in chapter 7, but can't do everything, so we will move on to chapter 8. Okay, now chapter 8, first thing that I did is to put in some color coding to show some of the very interesting patterns that run through the chapter. So the chapter opens with Kol HaZvachim Shen Nit Arvu. And here's, I think, a very good place to note that chapter 8 is a transitional chapter within Tractates Zevachim. Okay, let's review what we've seen in the first 7 chapters. Okay, Zevachim, by the way, has 14 chapters. So the end of the 7th chapter is the halfway point of the tractate, and that seems to be significant here. The first 4 chapters focused very heavily on intention. Around the theme of intention, the Mishnah wove in various other factors, such as who can perform the sacrificial rites and who can't. There are various other points that got woven in, but the main point was improper intentions. Chapter 5 gave us our overview of all of the animal sacrifices and the hierarchy. Chapters 6 and 7 focused on bird sacrifices. Now, there's one other major kind of sacrifice that doesn't appear in Tractates Zevachim. It's mentioned in passing in one or two places, but it doesn't really appear, and that is menachot.
Flour.
Okay, we usually call it meal offerings, is the usual term. Okay, the meal offerings that are offered from flour or sometimes baked matzot. One or two occasions, actual bread. Okay, not even matzot. Okay, those are called menachot, and they're not dealt with in Tractates Zevachim because they have a whole tractate devoted to them. That's the next tractate after Zevachim, Tractate of Menachot. Okay, so chapters 6 and 7 are devoted to bird offerings, and chapters 6 and 7 echo a lot of the themes. We saw this last time. They echo a lot of the themes from chapters 1 through 4. Okay, so chapters 1 through 7 basically give you a rundown of all livestock sacrifices. Okay, the 5 chapters devoted to the animal offerings, 2 devoted to bird offerings, and that concludes our discussion of what are the offerings and what are their basic laws. And now when we open chapter 8, we can almost immediately see that we're opening a new phase in the discussion of the tractate. One sign of opening a new phase is the opening Kol HaZvachim, because that opening Kol HaZvachim reminds us of 2 earlier chapters. Let's take a brief look at that here. Okay, see chapter 8 parallels chapters 1 and 2, Kol HaZvachim. Both chapter 1 and chapter 2 opened with Kol HaZvachim. Exact same term. Okay, so the echo here after a break of several chapters that didn't have that opening is very often a sign of a parallel, an anaphora, okay, a parallelism between 2 openings, okay? And when it says Kol HaZvachim shenit arvu, so that really confirms we're already in a different phase. We're no longer presenting what are the laws of the sacrifices. What we're presenting is kind of footnotes to, okay, we've reviewed the laws of the offerings, and now what happens if? What happens if sacrifices get mixed in with other things? And as we'll see, the Mishnah runs through different kinds of possibilities. Sacrifices of one sort or another got mixed in with animals that are supposed to be executed, put to death. One kind is chata'ot, certain kinds of chata'ot that are disqualified when they're still alive have to be put to death. And shora niskal, an ox that gores a human being and kills a human being, the ox has to be executed. So yamutu kulam. In other words, the sacrifices will not be offered on the altar the way they're supposed to, because you can't be sure. And rather than run the risk of bringing on the altar an animal that is supposed to be put to death, an animal that is absolutely unfit for offering on the altar, we can't run that risk, and therefore we'll have to give up on the sacrifices and put all the animals to death. Then we have nitarvu b'shor shenevra bo avera, etc. So then, if it gets mixed in with one or another of these, so these are less serious problems. These are also animals that can't be brought as offerings. But here, there's a way out. See, the chatot meitot and the shor niskal, you not only can't bring them on the altar, you also can't sell them. And even if they were to develop a blemish, they can't be sold. There's a halacha here that we should elaborate on a little bit. Yir'u ad sheyistavu v'yimachru v'yavi b'dmei hayafeh shebahen. Me'oto amin, meaning that sometimes when an animal has been designated as sacrifice but can't be brought as a sacrifice for one reason or another, so what you very often do with that is you put the animal out to pasture, and the animal will, you can't do anything, can't work with the animal because it might be a sacrificial animal. So all you can do is let the animal live the life of Riley, live it up, go out to pasture every day, okay? No, don't expect anything of the animal in return. And then eventually, could be a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, the animal at some point will develop a blemish. Oh, that's Yiru ad sheyistavu. Yistavu literally means to become dirty or soiled. Okay, so that means to become blemished in this context. And then an animal that has been designated as a sacrifice, if it's not a chatat, and it's been designated as a sacrifice and develops a blemish, it can be sold, and the proceeds will be used to purchase a sacrifice. Okay, and so what will happen is you wait till all the animals develop blemishes, you sell all of them, and then you know one of those animals was a sacrifice, and so you don't know which, so you say, whichever animal was the most valuable, I'll take that sum of money and purchase a new sacrifice. That money will be the sanctified money. I'll purchase a replacement sacrifice with that money. The most valuable of them, okay, its value will be brought as a sacrifice, and all the animals have ceased being sanctified because they've been redeemed, and then they can all be utilized for secular purposes. And then the Mishnah continues with kodshim b'kodshim min b'mino. Here sacrifices are mixed in with other sacrifices. So possibility number one is min b'mino. Min b'mino means the same kind of sacrifice.
Can I
And
ask you a question?
yes.
Excuse me for interrupting you.
Yeah, sure.
From what I just understood you saying, if let's say you have a whole bunch of animals and you're not sure, and one of them was set aside for a korban, and then it got mixed up with a whole bunch, and you're not sure which one it is. So now you can't use any of them. So you take until so you let them go to pasture, and then you wait till one of them gets damaged, and the one that's and you
no,
take,
until all of them develop a blemish.
okay, and then you take the
and then you sell all of them.
Oh, you sell all of them. Okay.
Sell all of them, and let's say there are 5 animals. You sell all 5 animals, and for one of them I get $300. Okay, and for the and for all the others I get $200 each. Okay, so I get to keep $800 from the 4 that were worth less, and the $300 I will use. In other words, hekdesh always has to benefit. Hekdesh gets the benefit of the doubt. It could be that one of the $200 animals was actually
the one,
the sacrifice, but if I'm wrong, then hekdesh lost out on a more valuable animal. So in order to make sure hekdesh doesn't lose out, I will take the $1,100 that I received. Okay, I'll take 300 of it for this replacement sacrifice. The other 800 I can use for whatever I like.
So the 800 can be used for anything.
That's correct.
It's just the most expensive one you give.
That's right. And
Okay,
I have to
thank
sell
you.
all of them because I'm not sure that that's really the right one. I
Right.
have to sell all of them. In order to sell them, they all have to develop blemishes.
So you
Okay.
can't sell them when they're good.
Can't sell them without blemishes. So if even one of them doesn't have a blemish, maybe that's the one that really needs the blemish. Maybe the others never needed a blemish to be sold.
And they
Okay?
have to be
So
sold
until-
all together?
Yes. I can't sell them separately because maybe I'm selling the wrong one, right?
I
I
see.
don't have to sell them all to the same person.
But
I have
at the
to sell
same
them
time,
all at the same time, so that I will take the more valuable one and devote it. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Now kodshim bekodshim min b'mino. Now sacrifices get mixed in with sacrifices. Min b'mino in this case means the same type of sacrifice. An olah with an olah. Okay, a shlamim with a shlamim. Trouble is, one olah belongs to Reuven. The second olah belongs to Shimon. So I'm not sure which is Reuven's and which is Shimon's. So here the solution is very simple. Ze yikrav l'shem mashahu. Mashahu in this case means mishahu, which is actually the text in most witnesses. Okay, this is the Kaufman manuscript text. There's mashahu, but it really means mishahu. In other words, I'll offer them both at the same time, and I'll make a condition, and I'll say, whoever this belongs to, I'm offering it. So I'm offering both of them together at the same time. And I'll say this is either for Reuven or for Shimon, whichever one is the real owner. And the second one, I'll say the same thing. There's either for Reuven or for Shimon, whoever is the real owner. And then Reuven and Shimon have both fulfilled their obligation because his sacrifice was offered. And the one who offered it had him in mind. Okay, it's true. He also had the other guy in mind. Okay, but that the condition works for that. Okay, so you simply say, we'll offer them both for the two people, and that'll work. Then you have, when they get mixed in, min b'sheino mino, two different kinds of sacrifices. Okay, that's already a bigger problem. Because now, if I offer them both, I don't know what to do with each one. One of them has to be treated as an olah. One of them has to be treated as a shlamim. I don't know which is which. How do I offer them both? So we go back to the yir'u ad sheyistavu solution. Put them out to pasture, let them develop blemishes, sell them, and use the proceeds of the more valuable animal for each of the two sacrifices. So Reuven, let's say, between Reuven and Shimon, one of them gave us a $300 animal, and one of us gave a $200 animal. So when I sell both animals, I get $500. But to make sure that I'm not shortchanging hekdesh either on the olah or on the shlamim, I'll have to devote $300 for an olah, and I'll have to devote $300 for a shlamim. In other words, I'm going to have to pay out of pocket. Okay? So presumably you'll come to Reuven and Shimon and say, listen, Reuven, Shimon, both of you are going to have to chip in an extra $50. Okay? Because we're going to sell these two animals. We're going to get $500, but we have to buy two $300 animals. So both of you chip in an extra $50, and then we'll be able to buy two $300 animals. Okay? V'yafsid omotar mi beito. That's what the Mishnah says at the end. Okay, and the additional money will have to come out of pocket. Mi beito is what we translate as out of pocket. Then you have nit arvu bivchor v'maaser. What if they get mixed in with a bechor or a maaser? Same solution. Kulam yiruach yistavu. But here, these are both, okay, here, once they're redeemed, okay, you don't have to purchase another animal. The Bechor and the Maaser are animals that I didn't volunteer. They're obligatory. And the Bechor can't be replaced. Okay, a firstborn is a firstborn. Something happens to it, I don't replace it. Same thing with Maaser. Newborn animals, okay, and I take 1 out of 10, okay, of my yearly crop of newborn animals. That's the Maaser. They don't have to be replaced. So once they develop a blemish, I don't even have to sell them. I can now eat them. That's the halacha. Okay, I can slaughter them and have a nice yontif meal, okay, from them. Doesn't have to be treated as a sacrifice. Okay, and so on down the line. Okay, asham shenitarev bishlamim, asham and shlamim. Okay, so one solution is Yirua Jistavu, and Rabbi Shimon says that here you can do something else. Here, these are 2 korbanot that have the same blood work, and the main difference is, can it be eaten for more than 1 day and 1 night? The asham is for 1 day and 1 night. The shlamim is for 2 days. And the asham is eaten only by the kohanim in the azara, and the shlamim can be eaten anywhere inside the walls of Yerushalayim. So Rabbi Shimon says, okay, so slaughter them both. Do it in the north where Kodshe Kodshim is slaughtered, because it might be an asham. And yachlu kechamor shebahen. Eat them in the more chamor way. Restricted to kohanim, okay, only in the azara. Okay, and if it's a shlamim, so kohanim can also eat a shlamim. A shlamim can also be eaten in the azara. Doesn't have to be eaten by kohanim and in the azara, but it could be. And the chachamim disagree, and they say ein mevi'im kodshim leveit absul. You don't sacrifice something with the idea that you are going to limit how it gets eaten, because when you limit how it gets eaten, you increase the possibility that it might not be consumed in time. It's shlamim that can be eaten by anybody, anywhere inside Yerushalayim. If I see I'm running and it can be eaten for 2 days, if I see I'm in the middle of the 2nd day and there's a lot more that hasn't been consumed, so I'll go out into the street and I'll say, who'd like to enjoy a nice meat meal? And I will get lots of takers, and they'll come in and I'll finish the korban in time. The korban is eaten only by kohanim, only inside the Beit HaMikdash, only for 1 day and 1 night. If it's the middle of the night and we haven't finished it yet, so who's going to join with us? So it's liable to become notar. It's liable to be korban that's left over. We don't set up such a situation, say the rabbis. Rabbi Shimon says you can set it up and just be careful to make sure you do it properly. And the Chachamim say no. You don't put kodshim into a situation where it should have more liberal rules as to how it gets eaten, and you don't put it into a situation where you restrict it because you are possibly setting up a situation where it will run over time, which we don't want to do. Okay?
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Okay. I understand that you can't eat a korban after its time, right? That's pigul. But is it a real sin to have leftover?
Yes.
Not to finish everything? In other
Yes.
words, the Torah wants you to finish everything.
The Torah says, lo totiru.
Uh-huh.
Do not leave it over. So if you leave it over, then the meat becomes asur and it has to be burnt. But the Torah also says, don't do it.
Got it. Do we get
Okay?
Baal
And so that's
Tashchis
why the
from this?
rabbis say, don't get involved in this situation. That's not a solution.
Do we
Okay.
get the idea of Bal Tashchis from this or no?
No, Bal Tashchid is an explicit pasuk, and it doesn't apply. This is specifically for kodshim. Bal
Got it.
Tashchid applies to
Everything.
any kind of food, and
Right.
Chazal apply it to utensils as well. Okay, anything that serves human purposes. Okay, then we move down the line. Yitarvu chatichot b'chatichot. What if pieces of meat get mixed in? Up till now, it's been animals getting mixed together. What if it's pieces of meat getting mixed together? And here, everyone agrees, yeyachlu kechamur shebahen. Because here, what's been done is done. Now it's just a question of how do you eat it? Answer, whatever is more stringent, you have to follow. So if that means you're limiting it, nothing to be done about it. You're in the situation already. Okay? And then we have limbs that have been mixed in with limbs. And here, one is a chatat, one is an olah. The limbs of an olah go on to the mizbeach. The limbs of a chatat, okay, get eaten by kohanim. What do I do with that? Okay, you can't say yachlu kechamur shebahem. So Rabbi Eliezer has a very creative solution. He says, put it all on the altar. But the limbs of animal A belong on the altar because it's an olah. I'm not sure which one is A. I don't know which is A and which is B. Whichever one is A, those limbs belong on the altar. The limbs of B don't belong on the altar. So what am I doing? So Rabbi Eliezer has a very creative idea. Okay, so treat these limbs as fuel for the mizbeach. In other words, there is no principle that the mizbeach will accept only things that are designated for the mizbeach. Even things that technically should be eaten by kohanim, if you offer them on the mizbeach, so treat them as firewood. So have a little extra firewood. So if somebody eats the limbs of an olah, that's terrible. Not allowed to do that. But if the mizbeach consumes the limbs of a chatat, okay, not ideal, but we're not in an ideal situation. So I am entitled to view it as though it were firewood. Okay, and this idea comes up later on, as we'll see in just a bit. The Chachamim don't like that idea. The Chachamim say no. There is no solution here. There is no good solution. There's only one thing you can do. To ubar tsurato, which means let it spoil, let it sit overnight. After it's sat overnight, it's regarded as spoiled, no longer fit for anything, not for kohanim, and not for the mizbeach. And what do you do with that? That's called notar. What do you do with notar? Yetzei levet hasrefa. Since there's nothing I can properly do with it, they reject this idea of meat as firewood. No such thing in their book. If kohanim are supposed to eat it, do not burn it on the altar. That's wrong. That's a wrong solution in their book. And therefore, you just have to let it sit overnight. And in the morning, when it's now notar, then it gets burnt. Regardless of whether it's an olah or a chatat, it all gets burnt outside. Okay? And another similar situation with Baalei Mumim. Okay? Then we move on to Dam Shenitarev B'mayim. What if the blood of the korban gets mixed in with water? So it depends on appearances, very interestingly. Yesh bo mar'eh dam. If it looks like blood, then treat it as blood. And throw it on the altar. Okay? What if it gets mixed in with wine? So see it as though, again, the same term, ro'in oto ki'ilu. Okay, but here there's no dispute about this. Oh, well, there actually is. Rabbi Yehuda disputes it. Ro'inoto ki'ilu hu mayim. Excuse me, it disagrees in the next case. In this case, there is no dispute. Ro'inoto ki'ilu hu mayim. Had the wine been water, would it look red or not? If there's enough blood so that had the wine been water, you could detect the blood, you would see the appearance of blood,
You're
then
okay.
I
It's
would treat
okay.
it as blood. And what if I mix in blood with other blood? So here, again, the Mishnah says, Ro'ino tokilu humayim, same solution. And Rabbi Yehuda says, Ein dam mivatel dam. Okay? This gets into laws of tarovet min b'mino that we will learn more in detail when we get to Tractate Chulin, which I will also be learning with you a couple of months' time. Okay. Okay, that gives and we have one further ro'eh ani. Okay, ro'eh ani et hatachtonim lemalan ki'ilu hein mayim. Okay, again, it's viewing blood as though it were water. Okay, now we see what this whole chapter is about. It's all about what happens when sacrifices get mixed in with one another. Now, in a way, this is reminiscent of chapter 1. Because chapter 1 was, I just got mixed up. The korbanot are fine. They didn't get mixed up. The one offering them got mixed up as to what it was. And now the Mishnah sort of footnotes that here in chapter 8 with, and what if the korbanot get mixed up? And let's see how chapter 8 really echoes both chapters 1 and 2. Okay? The Orders of Mishnah opening we've already seen, right? Okay, and so that already gives us a clue that there's a correlation between these chapters. And the ending of chapter 8 is also similar to the endings of chapters 1 and 2. Okay, you look at the last Mishnah in chapter 8. Let's see. Have that here? No, we don't have that here. Okay, here, maybe we'll put it up on the screen. Okay. Ma'im b'makom shamachshava poselet b'chutz lo asat ha'mishoar kayotze. Mishnah here is talking about a special halacha of a korban chatat, that when blood of a regular chatat, whose blood is supposed to be sprinkled outside, okay, in other words, on the mizbeach, in the azara, if that blood, part of that blood was brought inside, okay, so the blood becomes disqualified. It was brought inside the sanctuary, so that disqualifies the blood. Only blood of special chataot, okay, like Yom Kippur, for example, only that blood is supposed to be brought inside the sanctuary. If you brought it by mistake inside, it disqualifies it. You can no longer bring it outside. But here the Mishnah talks about, what if the Kohen who received the blood received it in 2 receptacles, and one of them was brought in, but the other one wasn't. So there is the mishoar, the remaining blood, okay, that I never brought inside. Can that blood be used now outside on the altar? Okay, so Rabbi Yossi Aglili brings an argument from the laws of chapter 2. So b'makom shamachshava poselet b'chutz. Okay, if I have the intention, I had a machshava to bring the blood, let's say, outside of the temple, lo asat ha'mishoar kayotze. I intended to bring some of the blood outside, okay, but I intended to leave the rest of the blood inside and sprinkle that on the altar properly. So then it is not lo asat ha'mishoar kayotze. The outside part is disqualified. The part that remained inside is not. So makom she'ena machshava poselet bifnim. there is no disqualification of, I intend to sprinkle the blood of this chatat inside the sanctuary. The intention is meaningless. That improper intention does not disqualify. Okay, so how that fits into the Kal V'chomer, okay, is a bit complicated. We won't follow it right now, but what is important to note is the term machshava makes a recurrence. So the term machshava was a central term in chapters 1 through 4. The chapter endings of chapters 1 through 4 all had this term machshava. So chapter 8 opens and closes like chapters 1 and 2. Okay, one final point on chapter 8, and I think we'll have to leave chapter 9 for next time. Okay, you'll notice in the color coding here, there's a word play that threads its way through the whole chapter. The key term in the chapter is nitarvu, okay, which is to get mixed together. But now look at other terms that use the same letters. Ne'evra bo avera, an animal that had a transgression, a sexual transgression. In other words, bestiality done to it. Ne'evra bo avera, same letters as nitarvu. Rovea v'nirba. Again, same letters, okay, for bestiality.
Do we have any idea if that was common?
What? Do
Bestiality?
we have any idea? Well, in rabbinic literature, they present bestiality as being very common in the Gentile world. How common was it in the Jewish world? I'm guessing not. How accurate is their portrayal of the Gentile world? I don't really know. Okay, now a couple of other words that have the same letters. Evarim, almost the same letters. Aleph instead of ayin. Okay, limbs of the animals, and also ti'ubar tsurato. Okay, for the animal, for the meat to be left overnight and then be spoiled and be considered notar, the term is ti'ubar. So throughout the whole chapter, there are all these word plays on the key word of the whole chapter, which is nitarvu. I think is a very, very interesting literary feature of the chapter. Okay, we'll close with that, and we'll open next time with chapter 9, and hopefully get through chapter 11, which was what we're scheduled for. But we'll do what we can. So Erev Tov, everyone.
That was fascinating. Thank you.
All right, Erev Tov. Thank you everyone for joining. And just a reminder that the class next week on the 24th will be a pre-recorded session, as will the class on the 31st. Classes for Elul Zman are open for registration, and you can see our offerings, including more Mishnah in-depth Menachot with Rabbi Joshua Kolp, same time, same date, Drisha.org/classes to sign up. Take care.
Thank you.